Welcome to another episode of the Drew Versa Show. Today, I'm excited to have my guest, Patty Deutsch. Patty, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drew, for having me.
Great to have you. And Patty, you have had a wonderful career working in our political process as well as corporate America and for big oil as a communications expert, helping people manage crisis, communications issues, and just all the drama stuff going on today. So I can't wait to have you share your journey with the audience, and a little bit we'll get into that, the practical steps on what people can do to manage crisis communications nowadays, because you can be up and be popular, and then next thing you can be trolled and your business is in jeopardy. So a lot of things are going on in our polarized world. So having an expert like you to help other people, just fantastic having you on the show today.
Well, thanks. That's a lot to cover, Drew.
I know it is a lot to cover, but we'll talk fast.
Okay.
So how did you start? How do you become a communications expert? What was your journey like?
Yeah, I actually got my degree in rhetoric, which is something that doesn't even exist anymore. And the way I like to portray it is it's the art of persuasion, something that's very transferable no matter what direction I was going to go in, whether it was business or hospitality or finance, or you always need to be able to communicate and persuade people. I was lucky in that I took it from actually working in a hotel to working in politics. I was in Washington, D.C. during the Reagan Administration, went to work for US Senator, and then I went the corporate route and became a lobbyist, working for Fortune 100 companies, and then on to corporate communications. So I'm probably one of those few people that actually uses their major and their degree.
I would say there's a lot of convincing today. And you and I were talking about earlier, the challenges today with so many corporations, right? Whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's, supply chain issues. We saw, with the monkeys picking coconuts in Thailand for coconut milk, right? It's just their coconut water. Well, one of those things. And when we look at these things, how do you use rhetoric in a meaningful way? Because we're seeing where people are putting out position statements and they're actually not living to the position, right? They'll say, we support this movement, but yet you look at their corporate board or you look at internally and they haven't hired a single minority or they haven't hired a single person with a disability. So rhetoric is extremely powerful because it can influence people. But then when we get into the research and the fact finding today, we can see a lot of companies aren't living up to rhetoric. So what's your advice in our world that we're living in where everything's very polarized, super transparent, and easily researched?
I think the first thing is realizing that new norm is new, the transparency. Back in probably our parents' days, you didn't know the makeup of a company's board. You didn't know their strategy. You didn't know how they hire talent. And so this is all new. It's really difficult for them to navigate. And you mentioned, how do you be authentic? And I think that's the very first thing that they need to do. Before they're putting out position statements, look within. What is our company doing? And what can we honestly say? They might not be able to say, we are a diverse company, but they can say, we realize that diversity is important and we are establishing affinity networks, to try to attract more of that talent. So showing that they have action plans to do that. But don't come out and say Black Lives Matter when you have no Black people working there, and on your board and support, Black charities or the neighborhoods, in which you work. So authenticity is key.
What are the three biggest issues out there facing CEOs and leaders today when it comes to communications and strategy, marketplace and business, corporate? You've been with the Chamber of Commerce on the nonprofit side. You've been with corporations, the Fortune 100 side, lobbyists. Is there a theme that you're seeing right now in our society and in business, a nonprofit that kind of hits everybody right now when it comes to communication strategy?
So I think there's several things. Number one is knowing your audience. Whether that is, in the case of a chamber, it's their business members, it's their community. In the case of a CEO of a company, it might be his shareholders, board, the investors. So know who it is that you're talking to, and then set yourself 3 key talking points and stick to those. You're going to be viewed much more as focused, as on point, sticking to a message. Sometimes you see this in disaster situations on TV, and you see a spokesperson that consistently says, they might get asked, how many people have been killed? Well, we are addressing the situation. We are making sure that our employees and the communities are safe, and we will be investigating how this happened. Hasn't this happened before? We trained for these situations consistently. We're right now addressing the emergency to mitigate it and stick to the same 3 points no matter what the question is. And I think today it's very easy for messages to go viral. We've got social media. We didn't have that 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
You had one
People with their,
newspaper, right? Where
yeah,
maybe
one
it made the
newspaper,
newspaper, maybe it didn't,
and
depending on who the
and you
editor
had
was.
3 networks,
Yeah.
right? They didn't know what was happening in little Pleasant Hill, California, and reporting it in Georgia. If somebody got stepped on, bomb thrown through the front of their storefront or what have you, it didn't hit the news instantly. Nowadays, you have to be so much more careful with your messaging because it will be broadcast widely. Something we often in communications study people who did it wrong, right? And I don't know if you remember when BP had their big oil spill, but their spokesperson said, as everybody is dealing with, devastation of oil on their beaches and ruining their properties and losing their livelihood and all that sort of thing. And the spokesperson basically stood there and said, I just want this to be over. And it really wasn't about him. It really wasn't. But oh my goodness, I mean, I think he was let go of that position pretty quickly. Actually, I think it was the CEO now that I remember from England. And so he stepped down after that. You have to be so careful about what you say and who you say it to and really know what your message is and who the audience is.
Let's talk about that. You made a great point, Patty, because the difference between years ago when maybe the news was coming out to see you for the interview, and maybe that process took an hour or two, and they were setting up the podium and all these things for a formal press conference, versus the media now can be Facebook Live right in your face as either an elected official, a business owner, the community leader. How you don't have time to prepare for talking points. So what do you do in that situation? What is your advice for people in those live, on-demand crisis moments when you either say nothing and do what Clinton was famous for? I don't recall, no comment, or you say something and what you say may or may not be used appropriately or in your best interest, the way it gets repurposed, as you mentioned, with the viral nature of social media. So what's your advice in those situations for people?
Media training. Honestly, the companies that I have worked for, they put their executives through media training. Now, that doesn't cure all ills. I was in a situation when I was working for a company here in the Bay Area. Company worldwide was downsizing. They thought our site would be affected as well. And so they sent out to all of the news reporters, and they were interviewing employees as they came on site. The employees would roll down their windows, microphone would get stuck in front of them, and the reporter would ask, so what do you think about the downsizing? Are you losing your jobs? This is even before the employees were notified. Fortunately for us, that site was not even being impacted. It was well run. Nobody was losing their jobs. So there was no story there. But in a day when anybody can be a spokesperson, you do have to worry about that. But, for large companies that in the manufacturing world, and as you mentioned, big oil, they have their talking points already. I mean, like I was saying, we know what to say. You're not likely going to have a disaster that deals with the finances of the company. It's going to be some sort of actual either explosion or leak, and so you know what to say. Your 3 points are: we drill for this on a regular basis, so our people are well trained to help mitigate it. Number one concern right now is the safety of our employees and the community, and we will be certainly investigating how this happened. And that's it. Those are your 3 points. It doesn't matter whether it was an oil spill. It doesn't matter whether it was an earthquake and things are falling apart. Those are your 3 points. So as long as people understand that and can stick to it, it's kind of hard to get waylaid from it.
That's great. And then we've heard so much in the media today and just on the news, fake news, negative news, journalists are portrayed in quite a negative light. However, I think, you and I, through our years working with different journalists on different things, the power of effective journalism and good journalism can really change policy for the better. It can change our communities for the better if done with the right intention. So if you are working with a good journalist and not somebody who's trying to cause drama and different things like that, but truly a good journalist, what are your tips for making a successful story with that journalist?
I'm really glad that you asked that question, Drew, because one of the things I pride myself on is establishing relationships and being a relationship builder, not only in the community, not only with stakeholders, but the media is part of that. You learn very quickly who the good journalists are and who they aren't. There are some that are out to get that headline, and you learn that pretty quickly. You think you have a really good conversation with them, and they lead with drama and have one quote of yours. Those are the folks that I tend not to work with proactively. If I've got a great story, I'm not going to take it to them. I'm going to take it to that journalist who has been fair, has reported the information that I gave them. It's absolutely okay for them to report an opposing view as well. But as long as they give the information honestly that I provided, I respect journalists. And so when I do have a good story to tell, I can go to them knowing that they are going to be fair. But another way to do this, when I work with companies on kind of building up their reputation, it's really hard to toot your own horn, right? Nobody wants to hear you talk about how great you are, but they are willing to carry a story of a third party talking about how great you are. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do as well, is work with third parties who can tell our story for us, whether that's nonprofits that we supported, whether it's a police department that we helped train, any great partnerships, strategic partnerships, those folks should be telling your story for you as well. Press releases these days don't work. You can't just send out a press release and expect them to pick it up. There's got to be a hook. And so sometimes there's alternative ways of getting that story out there.
I love it. And I'm a big fan of social media and digital media nowadays for storytelling. And, a lot of stuff like you're saying is the influencer strategy, right? And then there are micro influencers in the community where they have, 10,000, 20,000 followers, and they can spread something for you. So I think that's one of the strategies I like to offer to clients, on the business development side too, is looking at micro influencers, because people that have 10 or 20,000 relevant followers, within your niche can really do exactly what you're talking about and spread good, positive things for you without having to wait for that press release, that one in a million that comes through, the news desk.
The one challenge with social media, though, is also losing control of the message. So you can easily put out something about how we've just hired, our first female CFO, and it quickly gets diverted into, you only have 10% females in your company. Why is this a big deal? You're trying to greenwash. I mean, all sorts of things. And so you lose a little bit of control when you try to put good news out there on social media.
So Patty, let's talk about that as we wind things down on the show. Today is a momentous day in American history. We're seeing the United States Capitol being stormed by protesters and just craziness right now. We are seeing the result, your degree, rhetoric, being used in divisive manners that have created so much hate, so much pain, so much division in this country right now. And we know that in advertising, negativity works. The negative news, negative press, negative ad campaigns in political campaigns, it works based on human psychology. So how do you see us shifting to a more positive country through the lens of rhetoric? How do we get there? Or are we just doomed to have to accept that rhetoric is used in this country in primarily negative manners? How do we change the thing? Because we're a stressful nation. We see it in our healthcare outcomes. We see all these things. It's all connected. And like you said, the power of influence, the power of words, and using those words to either influence positive behaviors, positive things going on, love, hope, restoration, connecting like we seem to probably do back in Congress before, where there seemed to be more bipartisan support on different things. But the rhetoric now is just so divisive. How do you see rhetoric being used to make this country better?
I think you stated it so clearly. Things are so divisive and rhetoric is being used so negatively and is powerful. I think things eventually will swing back. I really do. I mean, I'm kind of the eternal optimist. And you see that a little bit. If, 10 years ago, you wouldn't see people on social media talking about how we need to love each other, hope that 2021 is the year of peace. They didn't say that in 1990. They didn't say that in 1995. And I think people are seeing that we're in this incredible time of change, not just politics. COVID has rocked our nation. I mean, we're doing business in a way that we've never done it before. People are not going into the office, they're working from homes. So they're spending more time with their family. I think that's a positive thing. I think that's one of the great things that will probably come out of 2020 is people are getting to know their families better. And I think that's got to be positive. If they're spending more time not commuting, sorry for the big oil companies, their profits have tanked. But as the country kind of gets back to what we were meant to be,
Back
country
to
based
basics.
on back to basics, family values. And I'm not saying what those values should be, but just protecting your family, loving your family, making sure that your family is taken care of. And how do you do that? Well, you have businesses and a livelihood that can support them. You put people in Washington that think the way you do. And I think a lot of folks, I mean, we're seeing now in California as well, they're talking about recalling Gavin Newsom. Well, we did that with Gray Davis many years ago. When people have had enough, they will rise up. They are rising up in Washington right now, not in a way that's peaceful and will get anything moving forward in any particular direction, but they're making their voice heard. And I don't think that's always such a bad thing. I think they're getting a message across. All the movements that we've had that have gone in, protests, and we're hearing that message loud and clear, and policy is changing. And I think eventually we will get to a point where we will swing back to a more common sense, loving, hopeful, joyful society. I don't know.
I love it. I'm all for that. I am
I've
all
got my
for
fingers
that.
crossed, Drew.
Like
Yeah.
I told you at the beginning of the show, before we started recording, I said we need a commander in peace, a commander in peace to
I love
bring
that.
everybody together instead of having thousands more years of war and war and war and
Yeah.
grief and the power of rhetoric, the words we choose and the ideology, our belief systems are extremely powerful. So
Yeah.
I think if leaders definitely need help with communication, how can they get a hold of you? Where can they go to find you and your new company after you've left
Yes.
corporate? You're now an entrepreneur. Welcome to entrepreneurship.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The company is called Volterra Communications, and Volterra is Volterra. It's actually a region in Italy. That is one of my favorite places to be. And so they can find me at volterracomms.com. My sweet spot really is working with mid-sized companies to help them build and improve their reputations. And I do that through a lot of the things that we talked about here today. Communication strategies, community engagement, stakeholder engagement, reputation management, setting up corporate social responsibility policies and that sort of thing. So look forward to working with some of those folks.
Awesome, Patty. Great having you on the show, and be happy, be well, use the rhetoric to a positive advantage. Thank you for the lessons and the nuggets from your years of experience in communications.
Thanks, Drew.